and thanks for joining us for the next installment of the I'm Curious About discussions. In this conversation, Pastor Jamie Larson McClune interviews Vicar Charlotte Linberry. Charlotte is the vicar at St. Paul's in Milwaukee and talked with us about the new movements in stewardship that have them really excited and engaged. And we talked about both some of the basic parts of stewardship and then also some of the pieces that can be done year-round. It was a great conversation. We hope that you are energized by it as well. Feel free to use this video with your council or your stewardship team, whichever group you think would be motivated by talking through what are some of the first steps. And Vicar Charlotte also shares with us a couple resources that you might find really helpful. So we hope you enjoy this discussion and keep coming back for more. Check out milwaukeesynod.org/curious. Thanks so much.
Welcome, fellow disciples in the Greater Milwaukee Synod, to I'm Curious About. This is our monthly discussion about mission, about curiosity, and about following together where the Spirit is leading us. My name is Jamie Larson McClune. My pronouns are she, her, and I am pastor at Bethel Lutheran Church in Muskego and Gloria Dei Lutheran Church in Menominee Falls. I am also a member of our Synod's mission table, and I am here tonight talking with Vicar Charlotte Linberry, and we are talking tonight about stewardship. Vicar Charlotte, would you introduce yourself?
Yes, hello, thanks for having me. I'm Vicar Charlotte, my pronouns are they and them, and I am currently serving as the vicar or intern pastor at St. Paul's, which is on Wisconsin Avenue in Milwaukee. I live in Milwaukee with my wife and our two dogs, who you might hear tonight, but I think they're both relaxing and trying to stay cool. Yeah, that's me. I got excited about stewardship fairly recently. I am finishing up my MDiv through Luther Seminary, and about a year and a half ago, I took a course at Luther called Money and the Mission of the Church, which is all about stewardship and reimagining how we can talk about money in the church, and also talk about how our money and our budget aligns with our mission as a congregation. So I want to share with you tonight some of the resources that I have found really helpful for stewardship and that I've been able to use now as the intern pastor in a congregation.
Thank you for that introduction, Vicar Charlotte. As you've been reading and studying and thinking about stewardship, I want to invite you to share what is exciting you these days.
Yeah, thank you. I have taken a couple of stewardship classes through Luther, and in the process of hopefully doing an independent study over the summer to research the ways that money and mission and also storytelling can work together in stewardship. And one of my inspirations for stewardship is my professor Grace Pomeroy at Luther Seminary, and she has published this book, which I think Pastor Matt is going to share with you in the chat. It's called Embracing Stewardship. I've found it really helpful that each chapter is broken into something different to consider about stewardship. So there's a chapter about how to write a stewardship letter. There's a chapter about how to talk to your stewardship committee. There's a chapter about how to think about stewardship in the first place. There's a chapter about doing stewardship year round, because if you're only ever talking about money in pledge month, then it's going to be awkward and people might just skip that month at church, because we as Americans in general don't like to talk about money with each other. And it's especially awkward when you're at church, and it's kind of challenging sometimes to get the theology correct of like, okay, we're not asking you to pay for like a subscription to church, and we're not saying that you have to give money to church in order to receive the services that the church provides. Like, we're still going to give you pastoral care, we're still going to give you communion, you're still part of the community no matter how much money you're able to give. But it is important to give money to the church, because there's a secular saying of where put your money where your mouth is, and then there's also the biblical saying of where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. It's not the other way around. It says where your treasure is, your heart will follow. So if you start giving your money to the church, then you're going to be more invested in the church. Just like if you give your money to, personal example, I give money to NPR. I listen to NPR all the time. I give money to the Wisconsin Humane Society. I pay attention to what they're doing because I think they're a really good organization. So that's, just a different way to think about how we talk about stewardship and how we talk about money in the church. Also, if your main goal with your stewardship campaign is to balance the budget, that's not a very compelling mission statement. If you're asking people to give money because there's a deficit, that in any other kind of nonprofit organization, that doesn't really inspire confidence in your donors or your givers. That leads me to the other book that I want to mention for your consideration, which is called Not Your Parents' Offering Plate. And I've heard people of you, they're like, oh yeah, I've heard of it. Read it thoroughly several times, or people have never heard of it. But that's also a good one that you could read with your church council. You could read with your stewardship committee. You could just recommend it to people who are interested in stewardship. I don't know, maybe they exist, people who are like curious about stewardship in your congregation. You're all here now. But this book by J. Cliff Christopher compares churches to other nonprofits and other ways to think about how you run the money side of the church. So like I said, I give money to the Humane Society. They have compelling stories. They show me pictures of dogs and cats that have come into their care, and they've rehabilitated them, and they've given them homes, and I know they're doing a great job, and I believe in their mission, and so they get my monthly contribution. Another really great example that you're probably all familiar with is St. Jude's Children's Hospital. That's a great example of, if you've ever seen a commercial for St. Jude's, you know that it's usually a pretty long spot, and they tell you a whole story about one kid and their illness and their struggle and how they came to St. Jude's and all the things that they've been through, and they show you, pictures of the child's progress, and you get really invested in this kid over the course of the few minutes that they're telling you this story. And they don't even say the name St. Jude's until partway through. You might be able to guess what it is if you've seen one of those before. But they tell you a whole story. They draw you in through stories. We as humans are really drawn to storytelling to make meaning of our lives. And so they tell you a whole story, and then at the end, they say, it's all because of St. Jude's. You too can make a difference in a person's life. So what if we applied those ideas to the church, and instead of saying, we need your money so that we can keep going, then it sounds like your mission is to balance your budget. And what if instead you focused on your actual mission? Most churches have a mission statement, but maybe people don't know what the mission statement is. That could be a sign that you can kind of revamp your mission statement and use that to guide how you want to get people motivated, and say, okay, why do you go to church? Why do you keep coming back to this particular church? What motivates you to be part of the community? And people will tell you all kinds of stories if you ask, because like I said, we're motivated by narratives. And so if you ask people, what is it that motivates you? What is it that that's really brought you meaning in this church? Listen to those stories, share those stories, either in a temple talk on Sunday morning, in a video that you send out to your church, or just in conversation with a group in your church. That really gets to the heart of what we're doing as a church, as a congregation, in our neighborhoods and in the world.
Vicar Charlotte, you mentioned that second book as something a council might discuss, or a stewardship committee, or even lay leaders not connected with their stewardship committee might enjoy. How are you finding in your reading and in your studying and your research, what might be empowering for lay leaders in this conversation? I often think of my own experience as a lay leader. The pastor was in charge of stewardship, and I did what the pastor asked me to do. And I never considered how I might be empowered as a stewardship leader in my congregation.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think it's important to keep at least some of the power of the stewardship with lay leaders in the congregation, not only because the pastor is sometimes a temporary figure, and the congregation is really the ones who are part of the community in a different way. But also, I think it's important because it's important to hear different voices within the congregation, because like you and I were talking about when we were preparing for this conversation, it can be a little theologically challenging for people to wrap their heads around. Okay, well, like you said, somebody had called the church and said, "Oh, I know, I haven't been giving to the church, but I'm hoping you can come visit me anyway." And I'm like, okay, well, that's a sign of a problem. Like, if the pastor is the only one talking about stewardship, the pastor is also the one who's talking about God's grace and talking about love and forgiveness and Holy Communion, and then also talking about money. That can be a little confusing. So I think it's important to hear from a variety of people. And also, the pastor's perspective is going to be a lot different than the people in the community. Hopefully the pastor is invested in the community and genuinely loves the people and loves being part of the community, but also the pastor is paid to be there. It's their job to care about the community. But the people who come to church, the people who are involved in running the church and doing the programs and invested in the mission of the church, those are the people who actually are giving their money and are actually invested more than just because it's their job. There's a reason that they keep coming back.
So I hear you encouraging us to tell those stories. As you continue thinking about stewardship, what questions is this topic bringing up for you?
That's a great question. I am interested in the ways that congregations can see the connection between their budget or how they spend their money and their mission and how they see their role in the world. I think this is kind of a new concept for a lot of congregations. I know when I took that first class, one of the first discussion topics that we had was what comes to mind when we say stewardship. And for a lot of people, it was just money, or it was like, that's a gentle way, a churchy way to talk about money and the budget. So I just, helping people find an easier way to talk about it, finding ways for people to connect the stories and the meaning in their congregation with their involvement through giving financially alongside giving of their time and whatnot. I'm also curious about how churches with more or less involvement in their neighborhood and more or less outreach programs, how does that affect their budget or their giving campaigns? Are people more invested financially if the church is more invested through their time and programs in the area? Those are things that I'm wondering.
Is there a story you could share with us about connecting mission and budget or drawing those lines?
Sure. So in my congregation this past fall, I got to help lead the stewardship campaign in October. And we asked a few specific people about why they came to St. Paul's or why they came back to St. Paul's. And one of the people that we talked to is a member of the outreach team, and she's been involved in the things that team does for many years. But she was so articulate in the way that she talked about finding meaning in relationships with people. She has said herself that she is the kind of person who can talk to a brick wall, and she's not always comfortable talking in front of a group of people, but she can just strike up a conversation with anybody. And the church does a clothing ministry once a month, and so anyone can come from the neighborhood and shop for some new or gently used items of clothing. And she just talks to people while they're waiting in line, or helps them try on clothes or pick out outfits. And she, in this stewardship talk, she just talked about how that's really where she sees God showing up in her life, is in these people who come, and sometimes they have nothing, but they still got a smile on their face, and they're still ready to engage in conversation, and also just kind of getting out of her bubble, I guess, to talk to people who have a different life situation than her, and seeing that God is everywhere, and God really showed up for her in those conversations and in those volunteering times. And that's what keeps her coming back to St. Paul's, and what keeps her, staying involved, and also giving money to the church. And that's something that I couldn't share. I mean, I've only been there for about 6 months, but even as pastoral figure, my experience has been different than hers. And so hearing from her and why she keeps coming back time after time, I think that was really cool for me to see.
Thank you. As we're thinking about all of this, as you're thinking about all of this, where do you think God might be nudging us, or what do you think God might be nudging us to consider at this moment in time?
I think lots of things. In particular, specifically, I guess one place to start is, how does your mission statement line up with your budget? If the top line item or the top area in your budget is your building, then that's not necessarily a bad thing, but how does your building help you live out your mission? Is it that you're having programs there, or you're having meetings, or you're having really great worship services that people come to? That is a really great way to be using your building. Or a lot of churches are facing large building, small group of people, and maybe trying to figure out how else can we use our building, or how else can we use our budget to best serve our needs, and also serve the mission of our congregation. I think also just the Spirit is nudging me to help people talk about money. And it doesn't have to be a scary topic, but just talking about the ways that we see value in what we spend our money on. So I can tell you that if you look at my personal budget, you can see that I value my local coffee shop, and I also value giving to nonprofits, and probably some other things too. But if you look at your church budget, you can see some other similar things. You can see, okay, this church values outreach, or this church values having a pastor who provides pastoral care and meaningful worship, or this church values music because our music budget is X.
That's a really helpful example. It's helpful for me to think about looking at my own budget and how my values show up in my budget as a starter to grasping what it means to look at my congregation's budget, and how do our values and how does our mission show up there. Is there a question? I have one more question to ask you, but is there a question I didn't ask you that you wanted to answer?
Ooh. I think the only other thing that I just touched on real briefly at the beginning, but to reiterate, talking about stewardship year round, I think is really important, and finding ways to integrate that. Not only, I mean, if you have like a 4-week campaign program type of thing, that is great, but then look at what else can we be doing the rest of the year, so it's not just like, oh, it's been a year since we talked about money, now we have to bring out the ledger and ask people for money again. But how can you integrate talking about money in Bible study or in a sermon every once in a while? Jesus talks about money a lot, and how rich people are hypocrites, and about how poor people who give their money or who share with others are really showing, that they really value, they're putting their money where their mouth is. We should say a large percentage of their budget is going to helping others. Yeah, so find ways to talk about money that's not scary. You don't have to be asking for money every time you talk about money. You can just say, look, Jesus is talking about money in this passage, and here's one way we can apply it to our lives without asking specifically for money for the church. Because I think that also just helps people think about money without tensing up, and think of other ways to apply it in their lives. Also, maybe see if there are ways that you can be helpful for the people in your congregation. If people are struggling to give to the church because they're struggling with their own bills, maybe have a personal finance seminar, or find ways to connect people to resources that can be helpful for them. If you don't ask, you don't know. And if you have those ongoing conversations about money, where you can talk about money when you're not asking for it, I think it makes that a little bit easier to broach those topics. So it's an ongoing process.
Yeah, thank you. I like that advice. Talk about money when you're not asking for money, and help foster those conversations. We could learn a lot from those conversations. Thank you. So as we close, I have one last question for you, and this gets to the heart of why we do what we do as the church. And so in one sentence, why does Jesus matter to you?
Oh, I didn't know it was going to be one sentence.
All right. We'll let
Okay,
we'll let you slide on that one.
I'll make it brief. Jesus matters because it all comes back to love for me. I think faith is rooted in love. We do things out of love because we are filled with love from Jesus, and we see how to love one another through the scriptures and through the traditions of our church.
Thank you very much. I want to thank Vicar Charlotte for sharing with us today. A video of this conversation will be available at milwaukeesynod.org/curious. And we intend, and we have had regular opportunities to dream together. We're going to shake things up a little bit in June. We are going to have a listening session. So as you think about your congregation's mission and the future, we want to know, what are you curious about? And I need someone to remind me what the date of that conversation is. It is at 6:30 p.m. on, I want a drum roll, but yeah, thank you. We're going to get that date to you.
June 28th.
Okay, June 28th. Thank you.
Matt got it right with you.
Okay, but I wasn't looking at the chat. For those of you who are experiencing this discussion on video, you can get connected to our regular monthly discussions at milwaukeesynod.org/curious, or by calling the Synod office. And in closing, we want to make sure that you know that this is really meant as a catalyst for you and your congregations to help the members of your congregation take whatever is the next faithful step in living into your mission. If you've heard something tonight that you think some folks from your congregation will be curious about and want to learn more about, or if you would like someone to help you figure out what that next step might be, please reach out to Pastor Matt Short on our Synod staff, and we can discuss how he or someone from our mission table might be able to accompany your congregation. So together, may we continue to follow the Spirit and stay curious about the new ways God is leading us as a church.